If I could invite Bill Bush up to the stage as well. Bill is the Executive Director of the Premier League for the sport that I would call soccer, but I think most of you would call football. So I will yield to the audience on that one. And we're going to have a quick chat today around the Premier League's views of the digital single market and associated initiatives. So, I mean, if I can sort of kick off, Bill, I guess you say you support a digital single market, but then there are certain elements of others' vision of that single market that you'd have concerns about, where you're essentially quite a fan of territorial licensing. And I guess I'm wondering, is that a case of wanting to have your cake and eat it, or would you like to explain why it's much better to stick with what we have now?
I'll preface my remarks first by an apology for Richard Scudamore not being here. He was delayed in London, and I stepped in as a late substitute. Hardly a youngster coming off the bench, but you know, something of that sort. We have no fear of the digital single market, and the single market so far has been hugely advantageous to the Premier League. We've benefited enormously from the freedom of movement of labour, for example. We find it an easy market now in which to sell our audiovisual. And one reason why we're so concerned about it is we are a major player in the audiovisual market, both within the European Union and globally. We're a huge producer of television output. We're our own television producer. We have a TV operations centre in West London. And it takes me by surprise every time I look at this number. The Premier League on its own, in terms of its television output going to the beyond the UK for consumption, primarily live football, but some clips and highlights as well. The UK earns more from that in terms of overseas revenue than the television programming sold by the BBC, ITV, Sky, Channel 4, the rest of the UK television sector combined earns less overseas than we do. So it's an important economic consideration in terms of revenue, jobs, tax return into government and so on. So it's not a small issue for us. And we like the single market. But the single market is not necessarily a single concept. It can mean different things to different people. And the threats and potential advantages vary according to your business model. And what we would argue is look at the quality of what is being served up to the consumer now in terms of sport audiovisual, but also the audiovisual sectors more widely, and progress on the basis of evidence and introduce change and allow for innovation, which is consumer friendly, because we can't earn that money unless the consumers are happy. So we want to say to the fans across Europe and across the world, here's the best that we can do, and destabilising the conditions in which we produce our output unnecessarily should be avoided, unless the benefits are clear, in which case it's kind of hard like Premier League. The global benefits to the European consumer as a whole are better, in which case we have to take our chances and fight for them. But to make the audiovisual sector as a whole worse off through change is not an obvious public policy objective.
So you're banking on consumers are mostly happy now, so there's no groundswell for change there. Could I also summarize that you support a simplified market, but not necessarily a strictly single market?
Yeah.
Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, and try and explain why. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, and Mr. Cavada made the point about how diverse the European Union is in terms of the languages and cultures. Even football, you'd have thought if there's a universal language of anything, there's a universal language of football. But that turns out not to be the case. And it's not obvious. In fact, the evidence is all the other way. The closer a broadcaster is to their local market, the Estonian broadcaster in Estonia, the Norwegian broadcaster, because we use EEA rules apply, and we sell in Norway on the same basis, they want Premier League matches mediated to them through someone who understands their cultural perspective on the matches. So, of course, in France, many fans of the Premier League want to follow Arsenal because of the great French manager there and some great French players at the club and been through the club historically. That may not be the same in other countries. So being able to shape our output or giving our rights holders intermediate broadcasters, the ability to shape what we give them to suit local circumstances maximises fan interest, and that absolutely is clearly what the fans want and what we want and what the broadcasters want.
And then, would it be fair to say there is a minority, though, of people who would like that kind of cross-border access? So more than the portability, but I mean, let's take it can be a football example, but it can be another example. But I've always struggled to understand how my ability to access a sport or an event I'm interested in when I'm out of my country where I'd normally have the rights to do that, how having that access would somehow undermine the profitability of the business in other ways. But you're saying essentially that that audience, like taking my example, I might be just one of a few people, and that really it's better to serve 80 to 90% of the people most of the time very well than creating a theoretical market that works for 100% of people, but then actually just pulls the rug from under that 80 to 90%.
Yeah, and perhaps if I use a non-football example, football is quite, as it were, universally appreciated, although actually the top league in terms of viewer interest in Belgium is the Belgian league, it's not the Premier League. So we're a niche product here, as it were. And I think it should be understood that pursuing ways of making niche products more available at the risk of making mainstream products less attractive is it's a small gain for potentially big loss. And the Rugby World Cup, I think, is a very good example. There was no commercial interest for the Rugby World Cup in Belgium, understandably. It was sold, as I understand it, across, there were 20 different deals to bring the Rugby World Cup to the different nations, member states of the European Union, but no one in Belgium bought them. So what the Rugby World Cup did was make those rights available, or make the matches available for free. You signed up to Facebook, you liked the Rugby World Cup on Facebook, and you got it for free. So in Belgium, the Rugby World Cup was free. It would have destroyed the Rugby World Cup model. It would have been a disaster for fans, for players, for the countries involved, the rugby unions involved, if that free Facebook Belgian service had been available free, without any blocking, in the UK, in France, in Italy, and the other countries where revenue was being driven. And if fans care about the long-term health of their game, they would care about that return. But equally, all fans would say, hey, if there's a few expats or there's marginal interest in Belgium, why shouldn't they get it for free? So being able to make that sensitive differentiation between France, the UK, Republic of Ireland, Belgium, and other countries in the European Union was of vital importance to maximise the popularity of what was an incredibly successful sporting competition. And if that gained a few fans in Belgium, then that is fantastic. But if that free offer hadn't been available in Belgium, then all that would have been available under some versions of what's being proposed for the digital single market would be a pay-for service, which very few people in Belgium, by definition, in this example,
or
would have been willing to pay for.
I think some people might have gone down that route.
Or VPN, but it's much better to have a straight transaction with the consumer, free where that's appropriate, paid where that's appropriate, and in the hands of the sport, making a view about what consumers want, what fans want.
Yep. Now, thinking forward, a last question in terms of what the Commission's going to come forward in the next few months. What's the one thing you'd go to the wall over? The one thing that you couldn't stomach coming out?
I think I've already alluded to it. It's the basic principle that Mr. Cavada spoke about, which is you shouldn't really earn from something you haven't paid for. And if the digital single market developed in such a way that the company which bought our rights in Greece, to visit a country for those who know the Pub Landlady case, but let's say this was an internet case rather than the Pub Landlady satellite TV case, if the rights holder in Greece could actively sell what should be the Greek service and is sold as the Greek service of our matches widely and unfettered across the rest of the European Union, that is in effect pan-European offer, and it would dramatically transform the way in which we and many other sports, I speak very much not just for the Premier League, but I think for football is absolutely united on this, as is rugby, as is cricket, as is French tennis, and all the sports agree on this. We need some form of mechanism to be able to offer what we do on a way that is appropriate to the cultural group in question, without entrepreneurs in that group, then, as it were, treating that contract, abusing that contract, and then selling it competitively across the rest of the European Union. What that would do wouldn't be good for us, but what it would do, I think, it would drive prices up and reduce choice for fans. And if you like, a public policy instrument which leads to that outcome is clearly undesirable, not just for us, but for the fans. And in the end, it's serving the fan that really matters to the sports in this area.